Good afternoon to you, Scott Baker.
Say that again.
Good afternoon to you, Scott Baker.
It didn't. I don't know. It sounded like you slurred a word there for a minute, and I was like, maybe the
Oh, I
party
may
has
have.
started. The party has started early, but
I think I may have called you Stott instead of Scott.
that's what I thought I heard, and I was, I was. I think there was a famous theologian named Stott. There's probably some other, famous Stotts out there. So I'm fine with that, and so I'm not going to disagree with the way that you opened it. And as you know, as our conversation went yesterday, I am low in the characteristic of agreeableness because I'm very low in the characteristic of politeness on the big five sort of subcategories.
So no boss you've had has ever had an issue with this particular field note as you being a team member who are afraid of disagreement.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. So that's titled Team Members Who Are Afraid of Disagreement. It's field note 1604. This is Friday, October 31st. It's Halloween. We're live here in the 3:00 Eastern hour. So welcome to everybody that might be joining live, and welcome to all of you listening later. You're beloved equally, whether you're listening later or watching live now. So now, I guess one of the questions will be, some people will not have read or heard yesterday's discussion around leaders who confuse kindness with agreeableness, because sometimes being kind is not necessarily being agreeable. Right. Here, we're trying to elevate some of the ability to live with disagreement, that the idea of being disagreeable is not necessarily a negative. So I really do love the theme here.
Right. So yesterday's approach was for leaders, right, in particular, like what their approach should be. And this one is about helping their team members. So it's interesting in the way that we kind of pulled this apart, because we're listing, there's several reasons. Like we didn't spend a whole lot of time in yesterday's field note to like explore the empathy around this whole topic. But in the way that it's discussed today, like one of the first things we do is like consider some of the reasons why team members might genuinely be afraid to disagree, right? And then they're listed, right? Some people might be judged or feelings of rejection, right? There might be something in their past that brings that up. They may perceive that disagreement exposes them and proves that they're uninformed or not as thoughtful as other people, right?
Yeah.
And and then we list through 4 or 5 of them. But it's interesting that we didn't take this empathy approach yesterday because it was written from a different perspective. But today's perspective is like, let's try to help. And so, come on, leaders, empathize a little bit with these people who are not you, right?
Yeah, right.
We don't always write that way, but this is interesting that we did write this way today.
Well, and that maybe we can get to this later, which is there's an interesting lesson here in figuring out the motives around a particular thing, right? So it obviously, the field note says some people will avoid disagreement because they just don't like tension, right? But as you pointed out, a couple of the sub things, which is there's another thing going on, right? That you're not quite saying, and which good salespeople probe for that. Good investigators. My wife was watching a new Netflix series that had some crime in it, and at one point the investigator was saying to the woman, "Isn't there another reason?" And so this is actually asking leaders to say, isn't there another reason? Let's think down there. Now, we don't have to get in the weeds on the particularities, because that's the point of admired leadership, which is we're looking for sort of broad patterns of behavior. How can you make then all of these people have, let's call it conflict confidence, meaning I can enter into a discussion, a dialogue where there is some disagreement, there is a degree of tension, and that's not only necessarily a bad thing, I might actually come to learn how to embrace that.
Yeah. I perceive this as a pretty narrow group of people, though, right?
You mean in terms of the people who would avoid this?
Who are actually afraid of disagreement. I think that there are people who avoid disagreement not because they're afraid of it. There's lots of people and lots of reasons why people are actually choosing to avoid it. Maybe it's mostly it's probably based on self-interest, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll be self-protection, but I think that there's a lot of other self-interested reasons besides them trying to protect themselves from fear or conflict of fear, right? Or fear of conflict, in a way that it just makes me feel like most of the times when we see this, maybe this doesn't really come up. And so it's interesting that this particular field note focuses in on the people who are like genuinely afraid of conflict, afraid of disagreement, and how as a leader you should help them that. Because most of the time we're not recommending that leaders become therapists in this kind of way.
Well, right? And in this one, you are becoming a cognitive behavioral therapist.
Yes, right. And so you usually shy away from that, but probably because it's behavioral based, we have some strong recommendations on things that you should do instead of things that you should explore with people. We're not telling people, have a longer conversation about where it is. We're almost saying the why, even though we're empathizing with it, doesn't really matter, right? If you find one of these people in your organization and they are being disruptive and aren't making the place better, here's some behavioral things that you might do, right? So if you're ever going to be a therapist, which we're never recommending it, be a behavioral therapist. Which is an interesting approach.
And even as just a recap of some of the subpoints about a why somebody might avoid this, that is interesting, which is it might not initially occur to you, but it's not just that people want to be liked, but this idea that in a conflict or a deeper discussion where I might actually be exposed. Maybe I'm a little uncertain about my new position, or my colleagues seem to perceive me as being very knowledgeable, but I don't feel always as knowledgeable as they think that I am. And so in some of these discussions, that might be revealed. And so that's a nature for like kind of where and it's not that the person doesn't show up for the meeting, it's that they check out of the meeting. So what would you do if you were an actual cognitive behavioral therapist and you had somebody who was afraid of getting on elevators? Well, we know that process, which is you'd probably talk about that for a while. You'd talk about elevators. You'd think about what elevator rides are like. And then some therapists actually do field trips and they take somebody and they'll go, and we're going to go look at the elevator. We're just going to stand here for a while and we're going to watch people get on and off the elevator. And then at some point, maybe you've taken somebody and you've arranged for somebody to stop the elevator, but leave the doors open. And you're going to look at the elevator, right? The elevator's not going anywhere. And then you're going to have somebody step into the elevator when it's not going to go anywhere. It's turned off. And you're just going to get used to the feeling of that, right?
Yes.
And then at some point, maybe the person, and maybe this takes minutes, probably not. Maybe it takes a while, right? Yes. And some cognitive behavioral problems, people will work on that and then eventually get to that stage and where it's not a problem anymore. Yes. And you and I have talked about one weird incident that I had on an airplane that led to kind of like me going like, let's talk about that. And if we have time, we'll talk about it. But the point being, that's what the leader is doing here. And the idea here is the heart of this is, for that person, can you engage in disagreement, get them into a conversation where they're going to take a stance that might be different than others on things that just don't matter or don't matter very much. And so that they get comfortable in the dialogue and in the reps of that, where they're like, this is okay. This feels fine. The water is warm. Come on in.
So would a psychologist consider that exposure therapy or behavioral therapy, or is it the same thing?
I wish I had like some weird, psychologist hat to put on or
right. Because I heard
it kind of seems the same, doesn't it?
I heard a surfer, I think it was Laird Hamilton, talking about an experience that he had with a close encounter with a shark while he was out on the waves. And, it was a frightening thing. He got off. It was a big wave type of experience. And it was such a traumatic thing in the moment that he said to himself, and this is the way he tells the story, I knew I had to get back out in the water immediately.
Right.
Because he knows that the chances of him actually interacting in a negative way with marine life was really slim. But his flight or flight instinct was telling him that he shouldn't do this. And so he knew from his own, therapeutic sessions that he had, that him getting back into the water, within minutes, was important for him to expose himself to those elements again. So, and it doesn't really matter, but it made me think as you were talking, is that technically exposure therapy or is that cognitive behavioral therapy? But it
Right.
seems almost like it's the same thing, and maybe it
Yeah,
just
I'm going to guess there's some overlap, and probably some psychologist might look at this and be like, "Yeah, you guys just don't understand."
right,
We
right.
don't.
Right. We don't.
So, but think about then what happens then if you get somebody and they're in the rhythm where the field note points out, look, this could be a discussion around. It could be a discussion around sports. Like if somebody, like they love the Philadelphia Eagles and you love the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're going to make fun of their player, and then they're going to take a shot at your player, and you're whatever that is. Ultimately, and I think that there's a couple of ways to look at this. We could go into an analysis that goes around what happens to somebody in that process. I'd like to jump this over to the other side, which is, what does the discussion look like? What's the end goal of what we're looking for? And I'll set it up this way. I once took a trip to another country. This is 10 or 15 years ago. And I was working with a tech team in that country, very sophisticated. And I was there with another person from the United States, and we're in this meeting, and we're looking at each other because we're like, should we leave? These people are screaming at each other. And it seemed like it felt like watching some sort of family fight that you weren't invited to, and you'd be like, let's just slip out, and they won't even notice.
So you were a second culture. Was this other person you're referring to, was she
No, there
culture?
was also from the United States. So we're in this other country, and so I don't want to get too specific because some of those people might be watching. You never know. But I said at some point, boy, that was really heated. I wasn't sure if we should leave or not. And the person that I was working with, from that country said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "You guys were just like screaming at each other." And he goes, "No, we weren't." I was like, you were talking about this, and you called him that, and he said this, and then after a while, he was like, "Oh, that's just how we talk." And I saw a couple other meetings in that sort of neighborhood, and I was like, "Oh, they don't attach any feeling to those expressions, right? This is just how they do business. And there's no hard feeling. It's like they expect you to advocate with great passion and urgency around the things that you're talking about. The other person is too, and that's just how they do it. Now, I don't know that works in most of North America. I might in certain corners. I'm not sure. So, but the style we would stereotypically associate with the person that's yelling tack cab in New York City, that not kind of go over, say, where I was over this last weekend in Boone, North Carolina, in the high country, where I walked into a business where I wasn't a member. It was a gym. It was a member, and there was nobody at the desk, and so a woman came over. She goes, "Oh, honey, you can just come on in and do whatever you want to do." Right? Very different culture. Right. So the question is, what do we want our meetings to look like? What do we want our conversations to look like? And the field note is saying leaders want people that are willing to have blunt and detailed and principled conversations. And you're not going to have that if you're afraid of having that.
You're right. Leaders want unvarnished truth. And so they're not necessarily wanting conflict, but
correct.
Sometimes you have to go through an exercise of conflict to convince people that you really do want the truth. Right. And it came up in the comments yesterday when someone was like, "Yeah, you need to practice this." And I was like, "Okay, how do you practice it?" Right. And make it feel authentic. Right.
Yeah.
Because there might be times where it feels like you're just foisting it. Like if you're in a culture where no one ruffles feathers and it's a very agreeable culture, and the leader wants to kind of institute this idea of we're going to be really honest with each other. The first response is probably going to be more people just being in agreement, right? Oh yeah, we definitely want to do that, right? And then when someone disagrees, there's going to be the clam up, right? And so it's going to take some coaxing to be able to do that with the entire team. If you've got one person, go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say it takes a very attentive leader, because the field note makes the point that, like, let's say you've talked with the person, or maybe there have been some ways you've tried to engage them on the things that don't matter. And now you're in the meeting and you can still sense some hesitancy. Now, again, your purpose is not to be like, "Hey, by the way, in this meeting, we're going to help Patrick because he feels like really threatened by all of this. So everybody, we're going to invite Patrick into the discussion now." That's not going to work for Patrick or anybody around the table. It doesn't even work if you think that Patrick is being asked a question, just ask Patrick a question. But the leader is going to say, Patrick, I was talking the other day and you gave me an analysis on that spreadsheet and you pointed out something and I can't quite remember it. What was that? And then Patrick steps in, says it, and that maybe that fact or figure changes the budget conversation. So the leader is looking for a way to pull that person in to say the thing, just in a small way, and that creates the stage. Now, ultimately, what you'd like as a leader, you'd be like, I'm helping everybody get better. I'm making people and situations better. And that if I'm doing this all the time, that over a year, 2 years, 3 years, you'd be like, our meetings are so much better.
Right. And hopefully Patrick is kind of volunteering that information instead of you having to pull out of him at some point. So,
yes, hopefully, probably Patrick is now your boss, and you're reporting to Patrick. One of the things that I do think is that there's a term in some areas of cognitive science and these kinds of conversations around a nature of what you would call, instead of a dialogue, a dialogos, which is there's a dialogue, which means I'm going to make room for your opinion and my opinion, and maybe we'll get to something. But an idea of a dialogos, the way I've heard it, is it's a real openness to not only stating your position, but really being open to what the other person is saying. And I've seen people that come from wildly different backgrounds who are kind of sort of steeped in this sort of approach. And what you'll notice is the tensions go way down. Right. Now, the disagreement doesn't. Yes. But the way that they're talking around something, and I listened to a friend of mine who kind of comes out of this perspective the other day. He was in a conversation just like that. And I saw him do things he's done for me, and I've seen him do it hundreds of times. And he'll listen, and he'll actually find a point in something that you said that maybe you didn't even think was the main point. Yes. He'll be like, he said, that brought up 2 or 3 sort of images for me. And I'd like to think about this one because you said this.
Yeah.
And I had never really looked at it that way. Right.
No. The fact that you see that he's actually learning in real time just makes it
right. And he is pulling it in. Now he'll tie it back around to what he's interested in. Most of us don't want to express this like, you just blew my mind. Like I had never thought of that. Now I was on the phone earlier today with a friend of mine. I know we're over time. Who's a retired cardiologist, top brilliant guy, tops in his field. And one of the things I've noticed with me and with other people is he'll ask you a question, you'll say something, and he gets so excited about it because he's acting like he's never heard anything like this. Now maybe he hasn't, right? But he expresses such enthusiasm. And he'll be like, yes, yes, yes. He like leans in on it, and it makes you so excited to continue the conversation, even if you're starting to draw him out, right? So as leaders, we can do that. Like that's really a great point. I want everybody to think about that for a second. So
fantastic. Okay, we'll talk again tomorrow. We got a preview of tomorrow's field note, specifically about the name of him. Oh, I lost the name. It was the Olympics guy.
Yeah. The field note is called How to Develop Your Memory.
That's not it. Okay. We'll talk tomorrow.
Thanks, Mikey.
All right. Bye now.